I have the pleasure of introducing Catherine Tucker. So the subject is fascinating, the tension between viral communications and traditional advertising. Since I was a Sloan class of 91, I still have a little piece of me near and dear to traditional advertising. On the other hand, I've seen a lot of cool stuff that works, that goes viral. So Professor Tucker's research focuses on how technology firms and technology itself allows digital data to improve their operations and marketing, and the challenges this poses in turn for regulators and regulations designed to promote innovation. She is an expert on online advertising, digital health, social media, electronic privacy. I was about to say piracy. But everyone can read her bio very close. She's won all the awards. We are really, really enthralled to spend the next hour with you. Thanks.
Oh, well, that is absolutely lovely. Thank you. Okay, wonderful. So can I just say that there's something about this event which makes me so proud to be an MIT professor. At most reunions, at 3 o'clock on a Friday of the reunion, everyone would be out drinking, having a nice time. But instead at MIT, we think it's a really good idea to bring you into the classroom and make you listen to some technical econometrics. So I think we should just all applaud what MIT stands for at this moment, because we're embodying it. And look, all the people you might have thought were sneaking out to start drinking, they're not. They're coming in. They're unstoppable. It's the MIT spirit. It's wonderful. Okay, so you heard a little bit about me. So for those of you, there's some new faces in the room. Who am I? I am the professor who gets to teach pricing to the MBA students. I see someone for 2015. 2011, I taught. People from 2007, I just have to say sorry. I was a new professor at the time, but they're probably definitely avoiding this event. And I also have the delight of teaching the EMBA students marketing management. And thank you. Yes, I see a few of them are braving this room. Anyway, so that's who I am. And as you'll gather from that, I am a marketing professor. And what I thought might be useful today is to present, and I'm going to do this without apologies, research papers which I've written on the tension between all we used to teach you in the 1990s about traditional advertising and the new world of social media. So what is my sort of aim in this? Well, as you heard from my very kind introducer, a lot has changed since we thought about traditional advertising. And certainly now, if I got the MBA students in this room and asked them how they were going to promote anything, they would not be thinking about traditional TV advertising. Instead, they would be immediately drawn to social media. And why is this? Well, it's just something beautiful in some sense about social media, in that it allows you to both, in some sense, invite advertising into people's identities and lives. And also, the really great thing about it is potentially you don't even have to pay for it, right? Compare that to TV advertising, where you're pushing it on people who want to watch a TV program, and you have to pay a lot of money. So if we were sort of to do some kind of survey of our current day MBA students about what marketing communications we should use, it would always be social media. And my job, in some sense, as a professor, is to throw cold water on that and suggest to you that, in some sense, it's going to be a little bit less easy than we sometimes think. Now, I'm going to present two papers. If you're interested, the papers are out there. They're long, they're heavy, they've got lots of math. I'm going to try and distill them. And we're going to start off with a paper about viral video ads. Now, what are viral video ads? Well, I think they can be best summarized by Old Spice Guy, right? So do you remember Old Spice Guy? You know, some people in the audience, faces perked up. Not just the ladies, which was quite interesting. And they, anyway, so he was this guy who single-handedly, by means of sort of being handsome and saucy, reinvigorated the Old Spice brand and took it from being this old, your granddad's or grandfather's aftershave to being something that people might want to buy now. Now, so people all know this. And as a result, when we think about viral video ads, people get very excited. And they think, oh my gosh, well, what could be better than me putting some kind of video on YouTube and seeing how effective it is? And that's somehow setting the world alight in this way. And as a result, when advertisers have started to think about measuring the effectiveness of this kind of advertising, they focus a lot on how many views it has, right? Old Spice guy, the combination of views was like 1 billion, right? It's huge, so we tend to focus on how many views these ads get. What I'm going to ask is a sort of less exciting question, which is, okay, so we're measuring this in terms of how many views it gets, but is there going to be a trade-off between the number of views an ad gets and how well it works? Now, what we're going to do this is I'm going to get data. And this data actually came from a contact of Ed Roberts. So I don't know, some of you are probably taught by Ed Roberts. He has done an extraordinary job as an MIT professor setting up our sort of entrepreneurial ecosystem. He's the guy, I think, central powerhouse between what is now the Martin Trust Center of Entrepreneurship. And he set me up with one of his favorite companies, which is called Visible Measures. I say favorite because I think he invested a lot of money in them. And I got some data on them about this idea of viral video advertising or people putting ads on Facebook in the hope that people will watch them. Now, so I had this data, but I was interested in, well, how well do these ads work and how does it vary with how viral they were? And so then I had to get a measure of ad persuasiveness. And at that point, I got to spend a lot of MIT money by sending out 25,000 surveys on a platform called Mechanical Turk, which is owned by Amazon. And what this did was basically, for each of these 25,000 surveys, people either saw the focal ad or a placebo ad. And then I went and asked them, well, how do you feel about this focal product? And any difference between the people who saw the placebo ad and the focal ad is how I'm going to measure advertising effectiveness. And this might strike you as very blunt force. Well, that's sort of blunt forcing advertising effectiveness out of people. But one way to think about this is that it's how traditionally we've always measured TV advertising. So it sort of makes sense given I want to use a traditional measure of TV advertising. Now, what I find in this paper is that on average, how well these viral video ads works drops by around 10% for every 1 million views that the ads have. Now, you might think, okay, so your measure of traditional persuasiveness drops as views goes up, but isn't it the case that there still may be some positive benefits to getting views if the total number of people seeing it goes up? And so I sort of calculated this, and here we got a graph, and these are basically, for those of you interested in the details, which probably you all are because you're here rather than outside, this is some graph basically based on a regression model. And what it shows is that given that viral video advertising declines in the number of views, we can sort of think of total reach or total persuasiveness, which is our measure of persuasiveness by times the number of people actually reached, declines around 3 or 4 million views. Okay. Right, okay. So I present this result in front of marketers. And marketers are like, oh, more of the same, in that, you know, it's usually the case we fade trade-offs when we do advertising. It's not the case that ads can do everything. Is this really a surprise? Instead, what marketers are more interested in is finding out whether there's a win-win. Like, is there any time where we don't have this trade-off between how many people are watching the ad and how well it works? So we did find some examples. So yes, You don't see this trade-off or this negative reaction if you have ads that are visually appealing or funny. Now, when I say that, I get another groan, right? Because let me tell you, an instruction to be funny is probably one of the most difficult instructions. We can practice it later on. Just go around the alumni the weekend saying be funny to people. It never quite works. I think more instructive, sort of because we want an early warning system, is that what we saw is, and this was quite shocking to us, is we actually analyzed the comments below these ads. And how many of these comments, we sort of take the top 20 comments, what percentage would you guess actually mention the product name? This was quite shocking to us. None. It was close. It was not quite none, but it was about 10%, right? And this is all comments, right? It only had to appear at some point in the comments to count. But even when you look at those top 20 comments, which YouTube is displaying, no one's mentioning the product name. If you are one of that 10% of ads where they did mention the product name, then you don't have this trade-off. So it's some kind of early warning system that if you look at the social media response and everyone's commenting on the actress, the location, but not your product, it probably means your ad's not going to be so persuasive. Now, the other thing is sort of, well, when did this really happen? Or when was it particularly bad? Because I think at that point we can understand what's going on. And what we found was that this trade-off was really bad for what I'm going to call ads that were rated as very provocative. And I looked at my data, and I saw what the most provocative ad was. And I should ask quickly, do we have anyone from Mars or M&M here? Because it was their ad, so I can go ahead and say this. It was their ad, and they had this ad, which I think was a takeoff of the 40-Year Virgin, which was about M&M's stripping chest hair of hairy men. Now, this ad, so it got a lot of views. But I must admit that when you watch this ad, you really don't feel like eating anything, let alone an M&M, right? Okay. And so, in this rather simple anecdote likes the story, right? A lot of these ads were being shared because they were provocative, outrageous, edgy, all words which can make a piece of content viral, but not something which is going to make an ad persuasive. And I think that's one of the big sort of downfalls in the metrics that we've adopted for measuring the effectiveness of these kind of ads, which is that we focus too much on just how viral they are, rather than necessarily whether or not we could be stabbing ourselves in the foot by making them viral, by making our ad content unappealing. Now, of course, because I'm a professor, at this point, maybe if I was in, I'll just sort of stop and say I'm great, but I don't do that. I have to actually say all the ways that my study was limited. So there are limitations. The study was for consumer products. Think about toothpaste, think about deodorant, think about candy. I'm not sure how this would affect a car or a movie. My guess is those would be very different. You've also got to worry. I got these people, as I say, through this Amazon platform to take all my surveys. They tend to be very male, well, 70% male, quite young. How much do they really tell us about the population? You know what? They don't tell us much about the population, but they do tell us a lot about the people who are on YouTube, because they look virtually identical. I don't study any watercolor effects. I just look at persuasive intent. And because at heart I'm an economist, I didn't get involved with ad design. I just sort of took that from the videos that I got. However, there are implications, and the implications is that this idea that we can just put videos out there and gain this costless reach and have people do our marketing for us, is a wonderful idea. But there are going to be trade-offs and considerations, and in particular, I want to emphasize this idea that we now have this tension in ad design between how much we want the ad to be shared and how persuasive we want it to be. The only win-win we can sort of find is this idea of being funny, We certainly want to be very wary about virality, which is a product of being outrageous or edgy. And there's this early warning system if you sort of look at the comments and see how much they're actually talking about the product. Now, what this means in general is that in marketing, we've always sort of talked about richness versus reach, TV versus specialized. And this suggests that this kind of social media transmission is perhaps part of the same story. All that's happened is just the labels. Good. So that's the first study. You've done very well. Do we have any questions about the first study before we go on? Yes?
Measure persuasion.
So persuasion, it's been measured. So what I want you to imagine, you see a Red Cross ad, you see an ad for Lay's potato crisps. I say, how likely are you both to buy Lay's potato crisps? The distance between you both is how I measure persuasion. Yes? Okay. So we had different labels for negative. We sort of talked about outrageousness, how uncomfortable it made people. They all ended up being highly collinear, or like sort of working together. And so I think one way to think of these results is that having quite a negative message can help with virality, but it tends to backfire when you're trying to be persuasive. Yes?
Did you look at all at political ads?
Oh, no. No, that would be fun. No. This was just toothpaste, unfortunately. Yes? No, so we didn't have that data. I can speak to that a little bit, which is interesting. So there's a whole new literature which basically says that match is really hard. And any one time someone tells you they've got a good match, they're probably measuring something too easy, right? Yeah. But if you're interested, I could point you some really good papers written on that. Yeah.
In a way, that metric that's reach times persuasiveness starts dropping after what's the reason?
Okay, so this is on average, because when we get to this inflection point, we have sacrificed so much of ad content, traditional sort of explaining why the product is good or where you should buy the product. We've stopped doing that. Instead, we focused on trying to make the ad viral. So there's this tension between how much, what I might call traditional, let me explain to you why you should buy our product type advertising, and the kind of advertising content we need to make you feel comfortable about sharing that advertising with your friends.
The question I have is, so it seems like it starts having a negative effect rather
That's
than,
right.
So it's not even just flat.
It doesn't even, yeah. So I think at this point you have so little persuasive in your ad. Because think, at this point, it's got to be something that a large proportion of the population is willing to share with your friends, their friends. And think how much more comfortable you feel sharing a video with your friends if it doesn't feel like an ad. But at that point, we've gone so much to it not feeling like an ad, it's just not that persuasive anymore. Yeah. So at that point, I've got to be honest, we run out of observations to be that clear, right? And somewhere out there, you've got old Spice Guy at 1 billion, and we don't know what he's doing. But he's funny, so he's sort of a exception to the rule. Yes?
No longer targeting people who are interested in that. So can you rationalize or reconcile the data in that you're going after people who are typically not interested?
So what you're describing is the traditional richness versus reach discussion in marketing, right? which is the idea that if you go too broad with TV, you're going to waste a lot of content on a lot of eyeballs who will never buy. I sort of think of this, I think of this as a parallel result in the online world. There's an interest, think of this as market segment of being the young kind of mainly male folks who spend a lot of time on YouTube. Right. Yes, Sloan?
So can you think about the negative consequences as similar, whether it's performance-based or brand, or when we're just focusing on brand awareness versus like actual persuasiveness? Is there a different impact there, or is it similar behavior?
So this is a good. I'm going to translate because I'm going to get to translate the question. And so this question is, which is a good point, is that often we put video ads out there just to almost have a water cooler effect, right? You've never heard of this product before, suddenly you know it exists, right? What we did about that in this paper is we asked people, have you heard of the brand or not? We still got the same results, right? Okay, good. Oh.
So you use Mechanical Turk. So are most of these people in the United States anyway?
So this was limited to the United States. I can proudly say on behalf of MIT, I'm the professor who's had the most people ever do a survey from Mechanical Turk. But I think we've basically exhausted the Mechanical Turk population at this point. All right, good. So that's the first paper. I'm going to now tell you about another paper, which shows the same theme. But this time, we've had YouTube. Let's go to Twitter. And at this point, I'm going to say I've got two co-authors. And I should mention that they are the glamorous part of the team who go out there and have managed to persuade all these random charities and firms who run these field experiments for us. And so what we do here is, you'll hear probably over this weekend, up there are at least 3 or 4 professors, especially in the OM group, who are sort of studying Twitter and thinking of it as a way of sort of trying to understand how things gets transmitted over Twitter. What I'm going to be doing today, though, is sort of thinking about Twitter as an advertising platform. And I'm going to ask this. We had one guy from Twitter once in my Ember class. Do we have anyone from Twitter here today? OK, this is not good news for Twitter. So let's put this here. It's not. It's going to. OK, so it's not going to be good news for Twitter. We'll talk about that. But it's not good news for Twitter as an advertising platform. OK. Actually, let's have a show of hands. Who here has a Twitter account? Oh my gosh, so many of you. Let's keep those hands up. Keep those hands up. Who has ever clicked on an ad for Twitter on Twitter? Ugh. Ever? OK, right. Maybe you could sort of walk home, right? That's my point. Oh, by accident. OK.
Who's clicked on an ad anyway?
You clicked on an ad everywhere. Like, one time you got confused, you clicked on something. OK. So my paper is in some sense about that, and the fact exploring, Twitter as an advertising platform. And at this point, what we did, and I'll be honest, I've always felt that Twitter, they're not really sort of centrally think of themselves as an advertising platform, and instead they sort of had a rather Me Too idea of sort of copying what Facebook and Google to some extent have done. And so we decided in this research to try and get inventive and think, well, what's different about Twitter? And can we do some ads around that? And what we thought was different about Twitter is that if you think about it, it allows us to identify the kind of people who get things started, who start trends, are talking about trends early on. And in marketing and the study of word of mouth, we've always thought these kind of people are really useful and essential. Think of them as the sort of mavens, the influencers, the people you want to get talking about your product. And we thought, wow, Twitter actually allows us to target to these people. Why don't we study how well that works? And so that was the basic idea. And let's be clear, the idea of targeting for people who are sort of on trends is not new. There's a whole lot of firms that are doing this, often with unfortunate consequences. Does anyone know the story behind this tweet and why you should be somewhat blenching? Yes, it's about domestic abuse. That's right. So hashtag why I stayed was a hashtag on Twitter which was all about, you know, trying to understand and not simplify issues of domestic violence. Someone on the social media team at Giorno Pizzo saw it trending and thought it was time to get on board. They're not the only ones, you know, in case I sort of seem like I'm just, you know, going after them. We've also had other examples of this kind of technique backfiring. You know, this one was I thought particularly egregious after, you know, after the whole, you know, the dreadful attacks in Paris. You know, trying to link that to hotel marketing, you know, it obviously is pretty repugnant. Now, so in some sense, I'm sort of illustrating the problems of trying to merge trending content with advertising content. But I'm going to show you just how much this is going to backfire in some sense as words, as well as showing you these anecdotes. And so we're going to look at this idea, well, given we have these trends, can we actually devise a way of targeting these influencers or trendsetters on Twitter and getting them to promote our message? And you know the annoying thing? We came up with this idea, we started doing it, and then we found out that the New York Times was doing the same thing. Now, I might be offensive here, but that should have been sort of an early warning signal that, you know, if the New York Times was doing this as their new wave of advertising, probably that wasn't going to be a good idea. But anyway, so that's what we saw. It's not an idea. And Pinterest is sort of doing something similar. We're sort of studying how well this idea of targeting social influence on these social networks work. And as I say, I had these glamorous co-authors who went out there and actually persuaded both a homeless charity and a very, very trendy fashion firm to run some field tests for us. And what the idea was that we're just going to simply target ads at the kind of people who jumped on a trend right when it began, and the people who were late to the game, right? The people who are still posting about a trend later. And this is what we found. This is the basic story of the paper. Basically, the people who we've always been taught in marketing to be excited about, the people who start trends, propagate them, are talking about them early on, are the people who just don't engage or click on ads. And I could show you that this graph is even worse if we look at retweets, right? The kind of people who start trends just will never retweet a commercial message. We get a similar pattern in the study, so this respect replicates. And remember, this is for a homeless charity and a fashion firm. They're very different populations, but we're still seeing this idea that people right at the beginning who jump on these trends right at the beginning just don't engage with our ads. Now, you know, again, we're sort of looking for that exception. The only way we could ever get these kind of trendy people on Twitter who start trends and are excited about them to engage with our ads is if we made the advertising content not look like an ad. So with the fashion firm, for example, the moment we started talking about how edgy and based in Brixton, for those of you who don't know, that's sort of trendy bit of London, that got people to start to click, even if they were early trend propagators. But in general, you'll notice a similarity to that video study, that people are just reluctant, or these early trend propagators are reluctant to click on anything when it feels too much like an ad. You know, so we're always interested about who are these trendsetters, who are the people who propagate trends early on Twitter. Did they sort of provide some kind of explanation for this result? You know, one thing we were worried about is they're just so busy on Twitter, right, that maybe they never have those accidents of clicking on Twitter or something like that. But actually, they don't tend to have so many more followers or so many more or follow so many more people than others. So I don't think it's about a cloud of explanations. Instead, I think it is an explanation that if you're the kind of person who spends your time on Twitter chasing new trends, then are you really going to risk that perception of yourself among your followers, among those you cultivate, by being the kind of person who also is seen to sort of retweet ads, right? Probably not. Okay, good. So again, we got some limitations here. It's not an experiment in the usual sense. This was basically MIT. We thought this was a good idea. We found out it wasn't, but we learned something in the process. Twitter is such a bad black box. No idea how their ad algorithms work. And, you know, we have two different invasive products. However, there is a big punchline here, which is that early trend propagators just are less likely to engage with advertising content than the people who are not late to a trend, not the people who disseminate trends. The only time we can get it to work is if the advertising message does not look like an advertising message anymore, which may have its own downfall. And so what this suggests in general is that though we can potentially use social media to identify who is influential and who is starting trends, we can't use advertising to influence them. And this is, I think, an important result because it's often glibly assumed that as soon as we can identify people, we can persuade them to act. And this is saying we can't. Okay. And so this, for me, you know, in some sense, as I was saying, it shows us that Twitter has a really uphill battle when it comes to their advertising platform. And indeed, I was intrigued to see, I don't know if you've seen this. I don't know if anyone in this room is that special. But if you're a very special and highly active Twitter user, then they're actually just taking ads out of your account altogether, right? And one other thing you'll have noticed is I think Twitter's sort of thinking of itself more as an API now, rather than as just generally an advertising platform. Okay, so let's conclude and say that in general, I presented these two papers because I think they have something important to say about whether or not social media is as straightforward as I think is sometimes supposed by our wonderful MBA students. In that, in general, there's always going to be this tension between trying to achieve what we want to achieve with advertising in terms of targeting the right people, in terms of persuading them to buy, and achieving the spread of our message organically without cost. So with that, I'm going to finish and find out if you've got any more questions. They could be about these papers, or they could be about anything in general. It doesn't matter. Yes?
Question, maybe it's a basic one. Do you think social media, like my question is should it be used for all companies, or it really depends on companies that have enough content to create viral?
Okay. So I tend to be on the more negative side there. And that comes from this time when I studied the social media practices of hospitals. And what I found there was basically that hospitals were spending an awful lot of money on social media to achieve absolutely nothing. Instead, all that had happened was that the social media, whatever that they would manage to do, was they were getting the employees to click on all their Facebook postings and Twitter. So all the apparent engagement was actually coming from the hospital employees themselves. And I tried to do some back of the envelope calculations, and they were just wasting millions and millions. I mean, you could argue maybe the employees were happier now they got to retweet a Twitter posting, you know, but you know, it's not clear it should be in the marketing budget. So in general, you know, if you're in movies, it is wonderful to be on social media, right? If you have a product which encourages people to talk, it is wonderful to be on social media. There are some firms, my job is to make you feel okay if you're in petrochemicals, to not worry too much about social media. Yes?
Have you done any studies on the B2B side of social media versus what you mentioned was mostly consumer product?
Okay.
Even hospitals like here.
Yeah, so I mean, so everything, I am hesitating just simply because we've had so little success in our attempts to launch social media as such. Having said that, we have had huge success in terms of search engine optimization when working with B2B firms. And so I think, if we're thinking of social media in terms of Facebook, even LinkedIn, recruiting LinkedIn works well, but in terms of brand propagation, it hasn't worked so well. Not so good. But when you think about actually creating content which makes you get found on Google, it's wonderful for B2B and may even be more effective than B2C. Yeah.
That's where I found effectiveness in social media. I worked for a mid-sized healthcare management company, and we had a trend for DIY braces, and for us it was key because we drove our search, our keywords from maybe 1,200 to I think now 2,600 in just about 7 months now. So
also your social media strategy was in some sense getting the content out there. Yeah, okay, so that's maybe a better way of saying what I was sort of struggling to say over there.
And I had a question.
Can you repeat?
Oh, repeat.
Me?
Yes, no, she's like now intrigued. She wants to learn from you.
I was, the way that we use social media is really as a strategy and a tool to get our SEO sort of moving and really driving our rankings on keywords that are relevant for our industry, so that then we drive more appointments, more patient appointments through our website for customer engagement.
So the idea is simply, rather than thinking of social media as a conversation, it's a way of forcing yourself to create content which allows you to get it found on Google. Yes?
What do you think about Instagram, Snapchat, and for both advertising and also organic, maybe marketing acquisition for brands?
Oh, interesting. Okay. So I have many opinions on Snapchat, but mainly to do with pricing. The little research we've done on mobile advertising is very unpromising about the future of that as an advertising platform. Instagram. What can I say about Instagram? Very little. I've got a PhD student in India who's busy working on this right now. Well, I say he's in India. He's like in India because for some reason we can afford to advertise on Instagram in India in a way we can't in the US. And so far we found like basically no evidence it performs any differently from Facebook. So I've got nothing exciting to say about Instagram. Maybe we will, but not yet. Yes.
A couple of thoughts, but they back up back just traditional advertising. I think you're right. Virality. The ads that I watch all the time are for little works that have nothing to do with the product. I watch them for the look on the baby's face. I watch them for some pause, and I don't even know the product. So you're right. There's a whole problem with why you read. It's not about the product. And so I would almost say back to original advertising. It's about impressions, just seeing. I used to work for Johnson & Johnson, so mothers and babies for 100 years. Just say Coca-Cola, drink Coca-Cola, enjoy Coca-Cola. And I wish the internet and what would go down to 2-second ads, like micro lending. I won't watch a video where there's a 30-second ad in front of it. I'll just stop because I never even get to the content. And so if they would just give the impression, now that doesn't give you time to explain your product or a new product. But if you want to say Lay's potato chips, you might get that impression, and no one's going to retweet that, and it's not viral. But is it effective measuring a revenue or something like that? So I just comments on just effective advertising.
Yeah. I mean, it's very, very unsexy to talk about, but there's something called the mere exposure effect, which is that simply if I say potato chips for long enough, right, and you will start thinking you want potato chips, right? And as you say, it's not sexy, it's not viral, it's none of these things, right? But it's effective. Right? Yes.
What does work then? What does work? Is it better than TV? It's like Facebook is supposedly, my perception in the economics that do well as a company, etc. People say Facebook ads work. Do they work?
Okay. So I'll say that. So I can tell you at the global level, right? We have spent a lot of GM money asking this question. The good news is we spent GM money, not yours. And TV works. TV works better than Facebook if you're GM. And the way I think about it is that a social media platform like Facebook is very good for product discovery, right? But we all know that GM exists. We just don't want to buy their cars. And Facebook's not going to change that. On the other hand, one of my other PhD students had enormous success using social media platforms for a very new product, where people just don't know the product exists and don't even know that they need the product, right? That's where social media works. And as I say, if you're GM, that's not your big problem. Yes?
Measure how many times it's efficient to retarget one of those viewers and for how long?
Oh, so retarget. So let me just explain what retarget means. So retarget is, when you go to Zappos and you look up a pair of shoes, and then those shoes stalk you across the internet, and it's fine, but if you're looking for something you shouldn't do, and then they're stalking you around the internet, that's not so good. But that's sort of what we mean by retargeting. And I read a paper on this, and retargeting is probably one of the least effective forms of advertising I've ever seen, especially relative to its cost, is what I mean. Advertisers are spending a lot of money to stalk you across the internet. And the reason I say it's ineffective is that it looks great if you have a naive measure of how well it works. Because guess what? If you were looking at shoes on Zappos, you're quite likely to go back there. But it's got nothing to do with the fact I was stalking you across the internet, okay? And so in terms of ROI, those are very, very ill-performing ads. So I would say don't even go there, right? Yeah.
Have there been any studies looking at demographics and the sense that the early adopters of social media have been the younger generation, mostly kids, teenagers, school kids, always wanting to Snapchat. And so with the purchasing power that they have and their ability to be viable commercial participants, so to speak, has there been any studies linking the effectiveness of social media advertising to the
demographics? Okay, so I can just give you a general rule. Anytime you compare a group of 18 to 24-year-olds with anyone older, whatever the advertising campaign, they will click less. Even if it's something that you think those 18 to 24-year-olds should be really excited about, they just don't tend to click on ads. And in some of the studies, let's be clear, I'm talking about an order of magnitude difference of like 10, right, in terms of click-through rates. So I think there's this big irony often in social media that we have a sort of stereotype about who uses it. But the people who are using it are not the people who are clicking on the ads. On the other hand, we've had great success targeting people over the age of 45 on Facebook, right? For whatever reason, maybe, I don't know, maybe our social, when you get that, when I'll include myself in that, when you get to that our age, maybe our Facebook feeds are less exciting and we're like clicking on ads, but, we're not. So I don't know. But the younger people, I don't know, whatever's happening, they're not clicking on ads, right? Maybe. Many reasons, right? Okay. Well, I think that might mean that we're going to declare immense victory. I am going to wish you an utterly wonderful reunion weekend. Thank you for spending this time with me rather than doing anything less technical and less MIT, and just have a terrific time and welcome home. Thank you very much.